Hello from wherever you're joining me, and I'm in the middle of Daf 46 Amud A. I'm doing Sanhedrin from the Koran Talmud Bavli, Steinsaltz publication. So I'm just about to read a footnote. Bavas Kohen Zumameha, the daughter of a priest, and those who rendered as conspiring witnesses. The witnesses rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who testified about her. This is a case where a pair of witnesses testified that the daughter of a priest had committed adultery with another man, so that she is liable to be burned to death, and when the man is liable to be stoned or strangled. Another pair of witnesses come and claim that the first pair had been with him elsewhere at the time of the alleged offence, and so that now the woman and the man are exonerated, and the first pair of witnesses are liable to be put to death by stoning or strangulation, which is the punishment that they had sought to inflict on the man. They are not liable to be put to death by burning, due to a Torah edict rooted in the verse written containing the punishment for conspiring witnesses, as he had thought to have done to his brother in Deuteronomy 19:19, not what they sought to have done to their sister, either woman, the daughter of the priest. The third set of witnesses then come and claim that the second pair had been with them at the time in question, so that now the woman is once again liable to be put to death by burning, and the second pair of witnesses are liable to be put to death by stoning or strangulation, the punishment that they had sought to inflict on the first pair of witnesses. The commentaries asked, what is unique about the case of a daughter of a priest? The same rationale should apply if the woman purported to have committed adultery with the daughter of an Israelite, as she is liable for committing adultery, and those who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who testified about it are liable for providing false testimony, and the adultery and providing false testimony are two different transgressions. Some explain that the same halacha applies in the case of a daughter of an Israelite, but since Rav Hista said that the bride is referring to a case of adultery involving a daughter of a priest, and the man with whom she is engaged, whom she engaged in intercourse, he also says it is referring to a case of adultery involving the daughter of a priest, and those who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who testified about her. Others suggest that since a conspiring witness is liable to receive the punishment that he thought to have done to his brother in Deuteronomy 19:19, is considered as if the woman committed adultery, and those who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who rendered as conspiring witnesses, the witnesses who testified about it, are both liable for the same transgression. Consequently, the Braitos can be referring only to the case of a daughter of a priest, as only in that case is a woman liable to be executed using a different mode of execution than the compromising witnesses. Conspiring witnesses, sorry. Rabbi Yonah says Duran. Tanya, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, is told in a Brayta. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Shemati shebeisdin makin onshin shalom min haTorah lo la'avod al divrei Torah ela kedei la'asos sayag b'Torah. I heard that the court may administer lashes and capital punishment even when not required by the Torah. No savo al divrei Torah, not with the violation of violating the statement of the Torah. Oh, sorry, that's the one. Now look at the footnote here. Shebeish din makin osni unshin shalom min haTorah. The court may administer lashes and capital punishment to those who have sinned, even if they are not liable to receive that punishment. This authority is granted to every court in Israel that sees that people have broken the accepted norms with respect to a particular matter. Some of the Rosh and the Rish and the Beis Yosef maintain that only the leading authority of the generation of a court that was accepted by the community may act in such a manner. And the Sefer Shoftim Hilchos Sanhedrin 24:4, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 2:1. And they may not administer these punishments with the intention of violating the statements of the Torah. According to Rashi, the sage may not impose a death penalty for a rabbinic prohibition as a permanent enactment, as this involves violating the words of the Torah. They may, however, impose flogging or even capital punishment as a temporary measure whenever they see that they are required. This is the Meiri in the Hammer by here. The Taz writes that the phrase "not with the intention of violating the statement of the Torah" means that if the Torah explicitly states that a certain action is permitted, the sage does not have the power to prohibit it, even if they do so by erecting a fence around the Torah. So sometimes they enact fences, but it's saying here that it can't be permanent. To disregard the punishment stated in the Torah and administer another punishment, rather they may administer the punishment to erect a fence around the Torah so that people will fear sinning. An incident occurred involving one who rode a horse on Shabbat during the days of the Greeks. Sherachav al sus b'Shabbat b'mei Yevonim. In some manuscripts of the Talmud, the text reads, an incident occurred involving one who rode a horse during the days of the Greeks, but it does not say that it occurred on Shabbat. Accordingly, it seems that at that time and place, it was specifically the Greek Gentiles who would ride horses, while the Jews would not, and the court punished a Jew who rode the horse for behaving like a Gentile, and they brought him to court and stoned him, not because he deserved that punishment. And riding on Shabbat is forbidden only by rabbinic decree, but because the hour required it, as the people had become lax in the observance of Shabbat, and therefore it became necessary to impose a severe punishment for a relatively minor offence. Another incident occurred involving a man who engaged in intercourse with his wife. Shehitiach es ishto. A man who is engaged in intercourse with his wife in public is flogged, even though he did not transgress any prohibition, because the people who witnessed the act might not have known that the woman was his wife, and he would have therefore given the appearance that he had engaged in illicit intercourse with Rabbeinu Yonatan in public under a fig tree, and they brought him to court and flogged him, not because that punishment was fitting for him, and such conduct not forbidden by the Torah, but because the hour required it. The people had become remiss in matters of modesty, therefore stringent measures had to be taken to rectify the situation. How do they hang a corpse of one? The cord would sink a post into the ground with a cross piece jutting out of it. Then they will carry the corpse's hands together and hang it by its hands from the cross piece in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Rambam Sefer Shoftim Hilchot Sanhedrin 15:7. So then you can see that picture there. It's a man and his hands are crossed, and there's a cross piece coming out of the post. And it puts it by stoning. They would sink a post into the ground, a korah, into the ground, into a piece of wood jutting out, forming a T-shaped structure. And the court appointee then places the dead man's two hands upon one another, ties them, and hangs them together by his hands. Excuse me. Rabbi Yossi says the post is not sunk in the ground, rather it leans against the wall, and he hangs the corpse on the way the butchers do with meat. The dead man hangs there for a very short time, and then they immediately untie him. And if he was left hanging overnight, a prohibition is transgressed. The corpse is hung only for a very short time, and then is immediately taken down. If it was left hanging overnight, a prohibition is transgressed according to the ruling of the Mishnah, and that's in the Rambam Sefer Shoftim Hilchot Sanhedrin 15:7. As is stated, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall bury him that day, for he that is hung is a curse of God. Deuteronomy 21:23. That is to say, were the corpse left hanging on the tree overnight, people would ask, what reason was this one hung after he was put to death? They would be answered, because he blessed God, a euphemism for blasphemy, and therefore the name of heaven will be desecrated, were then the corpse remain hanging, reminding everybody of his transgression. Rabbi Meir says, the phrase, for he that is hung is a curse, Lilat, God should understand as follows. When a man suffers in the wake of his sin, what expression does divine presence use? I am distressed, Kalani, about my head. I am distressed about my arm. What this means, see the footnote. Kalani Mevoshi Kalani Mizroi. The Gemara offers two explanations of these words. The commentaries add that Kalani should be understood as Kaloni, meaning my shame, so that these words mean I am distressed or put to shame by my head, I am distressed or put to shame by my arm. Rav Semagon. The Rambam explains that this is what one says when he has no choice but to perform an action that he prefer not to do. Woe is me for doing this. Imposing punishment. Woe is me for doing this, for not doing this. that the evil must be eradicated. Rashi Chagiga 15b explains that God is distressed about his arm, which had fashioned this one whom now being condemned to death. Others suggest that my head and my arm allude to the phylacteries worn on the head and the arm, as God himself is said to wear phylacteries, which contain words of praise for Israel. See the book 6a. Therefore, when a Jew sins, he brings shame upon the phylacteries of God. Talmudi Rabbeinu Peretz. Excuse me, meaning, I too suffer when the wicked are punished. For here it is derived, if God suffers such distress over the blood of the wicked that is spilled, even though they justly deserve their punishment, it can be inferred a fortiori that he suffers the distress of the blood of the righteous. And the sages said not only this, that an executed transgressor must be buried on the same day that he is killed, but they said that anyone who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses the prohibition. Kol hamelin es meso over below ta'aseh. One is prohibited from leaving his deceased relative overnight without burying him, and he must bury him on the day of his passing. Burial must be postponed for the sake of the honor of the deceased, e.g. to bring a coffin or shrouds to be used for his burial. That's from the Rambam Sefer Shot in Hilchas Sanhedrin 15:8 and Hilchas Eivel 4:8 Shulchan Aruch Yehuda 357:1. But if he left the deceased overnight for the sake of the deceased honor, e.g. to bring a coffin or shroud for his burial, he does not transgress the prohibition against leaving him unburied overnight. After the executed transgressor is taken down, he is buried, and they will not bury him in his ancestral burial plot. Rather, 2 graveyards were established for the burial of those executed by the court. Shintei b'tei kavoros hayu mesukanin levestin. 2 graveyards were established for the burial of those executed by the court. One for those killed by decapitation or strangulation, and one for those who were stoned or burned. After the flesh of the deceased decomposed, his bones would be collected and buried in his ancestral burial plot. Sefer Shem, Hilchot Sanhedrin 49 and Hilchot Eivel 1:9. One for those who were killed by decapitation or strangled, and one for those who were stoned or burned. Once the flesh of the deceased has decomposed, they would gather his bones. Likut at Somos, in the period of the Mishnah in the Talmud, the dead were not immediately interred in their final resting place, although they were buried in the ground until their flesh completely decomposed, whereupon the bones were collected and placed in a coffin and then deposited in special burial caves, buried in a proper place in his ancestral burial plot. And soon after the execution, a relative of the executed transgressor would come and inquire about the welfare of the judges. The relatives of the executed transgressor would come and inquire about the welfare of the judges and the witnesses to indicate that they hold no grudges against them. And Sefer Shem, Hilchot Sanhedrin 13:6, about the welfare of the witnesses, as if to say, we hold no grudges against you, as you judged a true judgment. And the relatives of the executed man would not mourn. V'lo hayu misablin. The relatives of the one who is executed by the court may not observe the rites of mourning, but they may grieve over his passing, since grief is felt only in the heart. Rambam Sefer Shot in Hilchot Sanhedrin 13:6 and Hilchot Eivel 1:9. One with the observance of the usual mourning rites, so that his unmourned death would not mourn, so that his unmourned death would atone for his transgression, but they would grieve over his passing, since grief is felt only in the heart. The Rambam explains that halacha prohibits relatives of the executed man from observing the standard mourning rites, but it can not prohibit them from feeling grief over his death, as feelings of grief are feelings of the heart over which one has no control. The sages taught in a Braita, were it stated, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, you should hang him on a tree, I would have him said that first they hang him and only after they put him to death, the way the Gentile government does, executing the person by hanging. As this is not referred to a Jewish government, Jewish kings, as they are authorized to execute the only way with decapitation, reference here to Gentile authorities in the Meiri. Therefore the verse states, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree, in Deuteronomy 21:22, teaching that they first put him to death, and after they hang him. So how so? They delay the verdict until it is near to sunset. If a transgressor is liable to be hung after his death, his corpse is hung close to sunset, and it is then immediately untied and taken down. From Sefer Shov in Hilchot 115:7. And then they conclude his judgment and they put him to death, and immediately hang him afterward hang him. One ties him to a hanging post, and another immediately unties him. The Rama explains that one was in charge of hanging the corpse on a hanging post, and another appointed to take it down. As were the same individuals responsible for both tasks, he might forget to take the corpse down and leave it hanging, and tie him in order to fulfill the mitzvah of hanging the corpse of the executed transgressor. Sages took from a verse that you shall hang him on a tree. I will derive that the body may be hung either on a tree that has been detached from the ground, or on one that is still attached to the ground. Therefore the verse states, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, you shall bury him that day. Deuteronomy 21:20, based on a double verb, and derived that not only must the transgressor's body be buried, but the tree on which it is hung must also be buried. As this employs the same to instruct that both must be buried, the verse teaches that the corpse must be hung on a tree that has already been detached from the ground and is lacking only burial. Just because it's lacking only burial. This serves to exclude hanging the corpse on a tree that is still attached to the ground and is lacking both cutting down and burial. If a transgressor is liable to be hung after his death, the corpse is hung on a tree that has already been detached from the ground. From Sefer Shov in Hilchot Sanhedrin 59. Rabbi Yossi said, the tree upon which the corpse is hung is not sunk into the ground, rather it is leaned against the wall, as the verse teaches that the tree must be lacking only burial, and so to exclude that hanging the corpse on a tree that is lacking in both detachment and burial. And the rabbis say detaching from the ground a tree that has already been cut down and later sunk back into the ground is nothing, i.e. it is an insignificant act. The Mishnah teaches, that is to say, whether another's corpse remain hanging, minus everyone of his transgression, people would ask, what was the reason that was this one hung? They would be answered, because he blessed God, a euphemism for blasphemy, and the name of heaven would be desecrated. It is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir says that sages told a parable. To what is this matter comparable? It is comparable to two brothers who were twins and lived in the same city. One was appointed king, while the other went to engage in banditry. The king commanded his brother be punished, and they hanged his twin brother for his crimes. Anyone who saw the bandit hanging would say the king was hanged. The king therefore commanded that his brother be taken down, and they took the bandit down. Similarly, people are created in God's image, and therefore God is disgraced when a cause is hung for the transgression that the person has committed. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Meir said that the phrase, for he that is hung, is a curse, kilelat, of God, should be understood as follows. When a man suffers in the wake of his sin, the divine person says, I am distressed, kalani, about my head. I am distressed about my arm. The Gemara asks, from where is it inferred? How does Rabbi Meir understand the word kilelat? Rabbi says, when a man is hung after he is put to death, God is like one who said, I am not light, kalait. Meaning, my head is heavy for me, my arm is heavy for me. God is in distress when he has had to administer punishment. Rabbi said to him, if so, he should have said explicitly, my head is heavy for me, my arm is heavy for me. But the Rabbi said, when he was hung after he was put to death, God is like one who said, the world is light for me. Kili alma, meaning I am light, and therefore the world is heavy for me, and I am in distress. The Gemara asks, the word kilinat is needed for what it itself teaches, namely that a blasphemer is hung after he has been stoned. How then can it be interpreted as alluding to God's distress at the death of the transgressor? The Gemara answers, if so, the verse should have stated, one who curses Makalo. What is the meaning of kilinat? It substituted the statement told by Rabbi Meir. The Gemara asks, if so, say perhaps that the entire verse comes for this purpose, to underscore the dignity of the transgressor, creating God's image, and not to teach the halacha governing a blasphemer. The Gemara responds, if so, the verse should have stated Linus Kilat. What does it mean of Kililat? Conclude two conclusions from it. Conclude that the blasphemer is hung after he has been stoned, and conclude that God is distressed after the death of the transgressor. The omission teaches that everyone, not only an executed transgressor, must be buried on the day of his death, if that is at all possible. Rabbi Yochanan says the name Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. From where is it derived that one who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him does get the prohibition? The verse states, but you shall bury him, kavod tikborenu, Deuteronomy 21:23, doubling the verb for emphasis, but from here it is derived that one who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses the prohibition. Over below tasa. This is difficult to understand. How does a positive mitzvah described in the verse, but you shall bury him, indicate that one who leaves his deceased relative overnight without burying him transgresses the prohibition? Yochanan suggests that since the positive mitzvah to bury is a general mitzvah, not to do executed by the court, it follows that the prohibition of his body should not remain all night, Deuteronomy 21:23, is also a general mitzvah to anyone who has died. Now, those who say that Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, from where in the Torah is there a hint to the mitzvah of burial? The verse says, but you shall bury him, kavod tikborenu, doubling with emphasis, but from here there is a hint to the mitzvah of burial in the Torah. Burial of the dead is a mitzvah by Torah alluded to in the verse, but you shall bury him. The deceased is buried in the ground, placing him in a coffin and leaving him above the ground does not fulfill the mitzvah of burial. One who leaves a corpse above ground transgresses the prohibition against leaving the dead overnight without burial. If he placed the deceased in a coffin and buried him, he does not transgress the prohibition. The deceased shall be buried without a coffin ab initio, and in any event the coffin should not be completely sealed. It was customary in some communities outside Eretz Yisrael to bury certain people, e.g. priests, in a sealed coffin. They would reconcile that practice with the halacha in one of several ways, e.g. the coffin would have holes in it, or earth would be placed inside the coffin. Rambam Sefer Shoftim Hilchot Abel 12:1, Shulchan Aruch Yerodei 348:2-3, 362:1, the Shach and the Bear hated bear. The Gemara lays King Shapur. Who's King Shapur? Shapur was the name of a number of kings from the Sassanid dynasty. Shapur in Persian means son of a king. King Shapur mentioned here is apparently King Shapur II, also known as the Great Shapur, who lived during the period of the 3rd and 4th generation of Amoraim in Babylonia. King Shapur, designated as king even before he was born, lived a long life. He fought the Romans and their allies for many years, seeing defeated and killing Roman generals and annexing extensive tracts of land to his kingdom. As for his domestic policies, King Shapur was an avid supporter of the Zoroastrian religion, and he attempted to impose it upon the Sunnis, especially the Christians. The controversy with regard to burial should be understood in light of the Persian religion, which viewed the burial of corpses as a defilement of the earth, and during certain periods the dead were even exhumed for this reason. The burial of Rav Hama, who was apparently the official sage of the Aglalach, indicating that burial was necessary according to the Jewish religion, and was therefore of great significance. And there's a picture here of a plate of the image of King Shapur II in the 4th century. Looks like he's riding on his horse. The monarch of Persia, 1/3 of Rav Hama. From where the Torah is a hint to the mitzvah of burial? Proof is there that the dead must be buried and not treated in some other manner. Rav Hama was silent and said nothing to him. He could not find a suitable source. Rav Ahab Bar Yaakov said, the world has been handed over to the foolish, as Rav Hama should have said to King Shapur that the mitzvah buried derived from the verse, but you shall bury him, Deuteronomy 21:23. The Gemara explains, in that case, King Shapur could have replied that the verse merely proved that the coffin should be made for the deceased, so he should be placed in it, not that the deceased should be buried in the ground, as the verse could be understood as instructing that the corpse be placed in some sort of receptacle and not in the ground. The Gemara challenges, Rav Hama could have claimed that the mitzvah of burial is derived from the doubled verb, you shall bury him kavod tigburenu. The Gemara answers, in that case, King Shapur could have applied that he does not learn anything from the double verb, which seems to be merely a stylistic choice and not the source of a new halacha. Some explain that the difficulty lies in the fact that two halachot are learned from the double verb. First, that burial is a general obligation and not restricted to one who hung, and second, that the deceased must be buried in the ground. Even though the sages derive halacha in this manner, this would not be accepted by King Shapur. The Gemara asks, but let Rav Hanan say that the mitzvah to bury the dead is derived from the fact that the righteous forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all buried. The Gemara answered, King Shapur could have said that this was merely a custom of the time, but not a mitzvah. The Gemara asks, Rav Hama could have derived the mitzvah from the fact that the Holy One he buried Moses, prove that this is the proper way to handle the dead. The Gemara answered, King Shapur could have said that God acted in this manner in order not to deviate from the general custom. Does not prove that burying the dead is a mitzvah. The Gemara says, come and have proof that burying the dead is a mitzvah, as the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite said about Abijah, son of Jeroboam, and all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him in 1 Kings 14:13. The Gemara answers, from here too there is no proof, as they could have buried Abijah in order not to deviate from the general custom of the world, and not because they were required to do so. The Gemara provides another proof. Jeremiah pronounced a curse upon the wicked, saying, they shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried, but they shall be they shall be as dung upon the face of the earth, Jeremiah 16:4, which proves that when no curse has been pronounced, the dead should be buried. The Gemara rejects this proof. From here, there is no proof that it is a mitzvah to bury the dead, as Jeremiah cursed the wicked, saying that they would deviate from the general custom and not be buried. Due to all these difficulties, Rav Hama was unable to adduce incontrovertible proof that there was a mitzvah to bury the dead. The dilemma was raised before the sages: is burial obligatory on account of disgrace, i.e., so that the deceased should not suffer the disgrace of being left exposed as his body begins to decompose, or is it on account of atonement, so that the deceased will achieve atonement by being returned to the ground from which he was formed. The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference that arises from knowing the reason that burial is necessary? The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, I do not want them to bury that man. If one said before he died that he does not want to be buried, the court does not listen to him, as burying the dead is a mitzvah. Rambam Sefer Shov in Hilchot Eivel 12:1, and the Mishnah there, Shulchan Aruch Yodei 48:2. I myself, and if you say that burial is required on account of disgrace, it's not in his power to waive his own burial, as his family shares in the disgrace. But if you say that burial is required on account of atonement, then he effectively say, I do not want atonement, and with regard to himself, he should be able to do as he wishes. What then is the halacha? The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the fact that the righteous patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all buried. And if you say that burial is required on account of atonement, do the righteous need atonement? The Gemara rejects this proof. Yes, even the righteous are in need of atonement, as is written, for there is no righteous person on earth who is good and never sins. Ecclesiastes 7:20. And even so, the righteous need atonement for the few sins that they committed over the course of their lifetimes. The Gemara suggests, come and have a proof from the verse referring to Abijah, son of Jeroboam, and all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him, for he alone of Jeroboam shall come to the grave. 1 Kings 14:13. If you say that burial is required so that the deceased should achieve atonement, these two Jeroboam's other sons should be buried so that they should achieve atonement. The Gemara rejects this argument. This son, Abijah, who was righteous, should achieve atonement through his death and burial, but these other sons who are wicked should not achieve atonement even in death. The Gemara suggests, come and have a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked, they shall not be eulogized, nor shall they be buried. Jeremiah 16:4, which indicates that it is not a kind of atonement that burial is required. As were that the case, the wicked are certainly in need of atonement, and therefore they should be buried. The Gemara answers, there is no proof of Jeremiah. It might be that the wicked should not achieve atonement. Therefore, the question of whether burial is necessary in order to prevent disgrace to achieve atonement remains unresolved. A dilemma is raised for the sages: is the eulogy Hespeda, a eulogy is delivered in honor of the dead. Therefore, if one left instructions before he died that he does not wish to be eulogized, the court listens to him. If he was a prominent individual, the court is not obligated to follow his instructions. Sefer Shevin Hilchot Evel 12:1 Shulchan Aruch Yodei 3:44-20 and the Shari Teshuva there. Is delivered for the honor of the living relative of the deceased, or is it delivered for the honor of the dead? The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two possible reasons? The Gemara answers, there is a difference in a case where one said before he died, do not eulogize that man, I myself. If the eulogy is delivered to honor the deceased, he is able to forgo this honor. If it is delivered in order to honor the living, he is not, as it is not in the power of one individual to forgo the honor of others. Alternately, the difference is with regard to whether it is possible to collect the eulogist's fee from the heirs. If the heirs did not want to pay the eulogist's fee, the money can collect it from them against their will. Sefer Shulchan Aruch 12:1. If the eulogy is to honor the dead, it is possible to collect its fee from the heirs, even against their will, but if to honor the living, they are able to forgo this honor. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the verse that states, and Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and weep over her. Genesis 23:2, indicating that Sarah's funeral was delayed until Abraham returned from Beersheba to Hebron to eulogize her. If you say that the eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, would they have unduly delayed burying Sarah due to Abraham's honor? They were rejected this argument. It was satisfactory to Sarah herself that her funeral was delayed so that Abraham could be honored by eulogizing her. Since Sarah herself would prefer that Abraham eulogize her, there was no disgrace in waiting for Abraham to arrive. The Gemara suggests, come to her a different resolution to this dilemma from referring to Abijah, son of Jeroboam, and all Israel shall eulogize him and bury him in 1 Kings 14:13. And if you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, all these people generally surviving family worthy of this honor. And the Gemara answers, it is satisfactory to the righteous when other people are honored through them. Since it is their wish, they are eulogized even if their wicked relatives are honored as a result. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the curse pronounced by Jeremiah upon the wicked. They shall not be eulogized, nor that they should be buried. Jeremiah 16:4. If you say that a eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living, why should the wicked not be eulogized, as perhaps they are survived by righteous people who are worthy of this honor? The one answers, it's not satisfactory to the righteous when they are honored to the wicked, and therefore they prefer a eulogy not be delivered for their wicked relatives. The Gemara suggests, come here a resolution on this dilemma from what Jeremiah said to Tzidkiah. You shall die in peace, and with the burnings of your fathers, the former kings that were before you, so shall they make a burning for you, and they will eulogize you, saying, our master. Jeremiah 34:5. If you say that eulogy is delivered due to the honor of the living relatives of the deceased, what difference does it make to him that if he is eulogized? The Gemara answers, it is possible that a eulogy is to honor the living, and this is what Jeremiah is saying to Tzidkiah. Enjoy the thought that Israel shall be honored through you at your funeral, just as they were honored through your ancestors at their funeral. That's the end of the Amud. I hope you have a very good week, and all the best. Take care. Bye.